So let's start. Anyway, recorded naman ito. So we're going to talk about simply the application of UVB absorption spectroscopy. So if you are active in the social media, something came out during the weekend. Okay. So ang ano doon, I'd like to show this to you. So what instrumentation skills does industry want new chemists to have? So the answer that we're given there, if you have read it, is how many? I think you need to have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you need at least 5. We could say expertise. And one of them is the one that we're going to discuss, the UVBs. And then maybe later on, the remaining semester, we're going to talk about infrared, IR. Now, the good thing, at least here where I'm teaching, students are required to have hands-on experience on this one. Okay? So this make it applicable to the topic that we have today. Okay? So if we're going to look at this what we call UVB's method, that's just absorption. No, that's just UVB's absorption spectroscopy. Or in short, absorbance. Okay? So if you're going to look at this, what we call UV-based absorption measurements, they are widely used for identification and determination of many inorganic and organic substances. So we could say this is probably the most widely used of all quantitative analytical techniques in chemical, environmental, forensics, and clinical laboratories throughout the world. That's why I told you before, if you have the Spectronic 20, kaya mo na magkaroon ng sarili mo lab. Okay? So if we're going to look at the characteristics of this spectrophotometric method, okay, I think these are the listed characteristics for this one. So it's wide applicability to organic and inorganic systems. That's what we're going to discuss today. Okay, how it can measure both organic and inorganic compounds. And if you're going to look at this one, typically it has a detection from 10 to the 4 to 10 to the negative 4 to 10 to the negative 7 molar. Okay. In some cases, you can lead it to much lower detection limit if you're going to do some modification. So modifications include specific reaction with, let's say, a fluorophore. Okay. Now, it has a moderate to high selectivity. I have mentioned to you before that some methods have been patented for a particular company, and they're the only one who can use it. So if you imagine yourself or think for yourself, how did they analyze, let's say, the level of creatinine, okay, or other stuff that we have in our urine or in blood samples? So usually some company has developed some sort of a method when they react, okay, a certain sample, They have a specific compound that will react with the target analytes that we have that make it very selective. Okay. And in addition to that, it is, we could say, accurate. The relative uncertainties are typically 1% to 3%. Although with special precautions, this error can be reduced to a few tenths of a percent. And most conveniently, we could say it is and convenient data acquisition. Okay, so it's applicable in every field that we have. And I told you, a simple lab can survive by just having what? UVB spectrometer. Okay, I think I know a graduate in UPLB who found or built his own laboratory, and he started with that one. Okay, just using a pH meter and this UV spectrometer, and now what we call the much better lab. Now, if we're going to look at this, let's look at the absorbing species. So we could say there's two processes that happen. Okay, when you absorb at UV or visible region, whether it is an atomic or molecular species. Okay, so we could say it's a two-step process. So the first step that we have is this one. What do we call this? The excitation. So the first step involves the electronic excitation as shown by this equation. So we always have this what? This is what? A source of energy. Usually in the form of what? What is HV usually? Anong inaano natin dyan sa HV? So usually it is a photon. The product of the absorption of photon by the species M. Okay, and what you produce is an M asterisk, which refers to what? Excited state. Now, if you're going to look at the Jablonski diagram, okay, so this we could say excited species, they have a what we call a lifetime, 10 to the 8, -8 to 10 to the -9 seconds. And what happened is, what can we say? Whenever we are in the excited state, usually what is that state? It is unstable. So most likely it will go back to the ground state. Or the term that they use here, the common way is it goes back to relaxation, okay? Wherein, okay, it leads to a de-excitation. So they said there are several things that can happen. One is from an excited state, it goes back to the ground state, but at the same time, it releases what? Energy. Okay, so energy in the form of light, energy emitted in the form of what we call phosphorescence or fluorescence. Okay, so we could say, so this relaxation, this is a photochemical process, it just leads to what we call the excitation of this excited molecule. Okay, so you can have what we call re-emission of the photon by fluorescence or phosphorescence. And if you have this thing, usually this is very short. Okay. Or the other thing that you can have is, what do you think the N here? You form a new species. Okay. So relaxation may also occur by a photochemical process, such as what? Decomposition of your excited M, and you form a new species. So this is what we call a photochemical reaction. Okay. But we always what we call assume, since the heat that is produced is not generally measurable, so it's not enough to form this what we call new species. Okay. So what happens is just the absorption of the UV for visible radiation generally results on the what? Excitation of the bonding what we call electron. Okay. So if you're going to look at this, so this absorption will occur with the bonding electron. So the energy required differs with the type of the bonding electron. We will talk about that. And the UV-based absorption will give us information on the nature of this bonding electron. Okay, if you are talking about an organic compound, so usually it has something to do with the functional that we have. So we could say all organic compounds are capable of absorbing electromagnetic radiation because they contain what? Valence electrons that can be excited to a higher energy level. So most organic spectra, we could say, are complex. Why are they complex? Because it's made up of many electrons in the given system. Okay? So the excitation energies associated with the electrons forming most single bonds are sufficiently higher than the absorption that occurs in the so-called vacuum UV. Now, if you're going to look at these most organic spectra, so we have to take into consideration that this is already a result of the following: electronic and vibration transition superimposed. Okay, so the electrons that you excite, okay, it can lead to electronic and vibration transition. Okay, and typically what you observe broadband in this absorption. Now, if you're going to look at the detailed theoretical analysis, it's not possible, but semi-quantitative or quantitative analysis of type of bonds is what we call possible. And this could be further complicated with the effects of the solvent and molecular detail. Any one of you has done like a theoretical calculation of molecules? Meron bang na-experience na sa inyo dyan? Let's say Gaussian, or the simple one, Spartan. Yung totoo. Anong software dyan? Meron ba kayong course na, I think it's in CChem. Because one of the things that you can do is you can do a calculation trying to get the absorbance of a certain thing. And you will see that the difference is just what? Calculating a gas, compare it with what we could put it in a liquid. I have limited, we could say, experience, but I was able to use it. Okay? Because usually, if you do some study, okay, it become more stronger if you put like a theoretical considerations or comparison doon sa experimental results mo. You know I'm an analytical chemist, so usually I use experiment. So usually I have what we call results. But later on, as you could see, if you have a gas spectra, okay, makikita nyo na you don't see a broadband that you have there. So example that is given here are what? Absorption spectra for typical organic compound. And you will see here, okay, the wavelength where which you could see where there is this what we call absorption. So if you're going to look at this typical absorbance of this what we call the organic compound, so you're familiar with what? Beta carotene. So ano yung beta carotene? Parang ganun lang yun, di ba? Tapos may parang double bond. And then you have what? Caffeine. Okay. So if you're going to look at this, so what can you say about the structure of caffeine compared to beta carotene based on this what we call the absorbance? paano yung ano ninyo dyan, interpretation? I think you have it in organic analysis. Okay. What can you say? Which has a bigger, what we call structure? Beta carotene or caffeine? Because if I'm not mistaken, the beta carotene that you have is just a chain that has what? Double bond, di ba? And what can you say about beta carotene? Am I right? Tama ba ako? Anong kulay ng beta carotene? Anyone? Compared to this one, okay, beta carotene compared to caffeine, acetone, and aspirin, they are what? Usually they are all colorless. But even though they're colorless, you could see that they absorb at a certain wavelength. So anong wavelength ko dito? Usually they are in the UV region. Okay. Now, if we're going to look at this, what we call single bond, because usually it's the bond that are taking place. So single bonds are unusually too high excitation energy for most instruments. So it's what? Less than 185 nanometers. So it's even lower than the UV. So this is where we have the so-called vacuum UV. So most of the compounds in the atmosphere, they're absorbed in this range, so it's difficult to work with. Usually we work in what? Functional group with usually low excitation energy between this. And what do we call this region? The UV region. And the type of electronic transition that we have what? The sigma, the pi, and the N transition. So what can you say about this transition? Anyone? Ano yung masasabi niya dito sa mga electronic transition? You still remember this? So what's the difference of the sigma, the pi, and the N? If you recall. So in the sigma, you have what? A single bond electron, right? So usually, I think we're reviewing Gen Chem 1, okay? So sigma is present in all bonds. Okay, compared to pi, which is only present in what? Saan present yung pi? Kapag mayroon kang multiple bond. So usually you have the sp3, sp, sp2, sp3, sp, right? So in sp3, it's all sigma. In sp2, there's sigma and pi. In sp, there's a sigma and also what we call pi. So if we're going to look at this, what we call the sigma and the pi, usually, therefore, they what we call, they participate in the bonding. Okay? So if you're going to look, let's say, at the sigma bond, there's what? There's an overlapping region, and if I'm not mistaken, the electron density, that's where the highest. So in terms of the electronic transition, the sigma bond involves the movement of electrons between the bonding and the antibonding sigma orbitals, like the one that we have here. So yan yung transitions ng sigma bond. Okay? So it is a transition, okay, of the bonding or the antibonding orbital. So when an electron absorbs energy, it can transition from the bonding sigma orbital to the antibonding sigma orbital, which breaks the bond. Now, the pi bond, what can we say about the pi bond? So in addition to the electron density, we also have what? An additional electron cloud above and below the internuclear axis. If you remember how the pi bond looks like, right? So meron kang p orbital that doesn't participate in what we call the hybridization, but okay, they can form some sort of a bonding. So in terms of these electronic transitions, the pi bonds involve the movement of electrons between the pi bonding and the anti-bonding. So if you're going to look at this, this is what? The bonding orbital and the anti-bonding orbital. Okay? So if you're going to look at this, when the energy is absorbed, an electron can transition from the pi bonding orbital to the pi anti-bonding orbital, which breaks the bond. So what do you observe there? There's always a transition, okay, from lower energy to a higher energy. As you can see here, it's asterisk here also, it's asterisk. The sigma to sigma, paano inaano dyan? Star for the pi to pi star. Now, the N, those are the non-bonding electrons. They are often denoted as N orbitals or electron orbitals that are localized in local atoms and they don't participate directly in the bonding. They are usually what? Anong tawag natin dyan? May term tayo dyan eh. Anyone? We call them usually the lone pair. Now, in terms of electronic transitions, anong pwedeng gawin ng N orbitals? They can involve in the movement of the lone pair electrons to higher energy levels, which can occur when the atoms absorb energy. And this can result in the changes of the chemical behavior. So you could see here the different transitions that we have. Okay. So if we're going to look at an example there, so I put here formaldehyde. So in the formaldehyde, all of these, we could say, type of electron is present. You have a pi, you have a sigma, and you have an N. So if you, what we call apply energy to it, there should be a transition. And what would be the transition? This one. Okay, so if you're going to look at the energy level, so sigma has the lowest, but the sigma star is also has the highest. Pi, okay, has the next one, and then the pi star, and then what we call the N. N has just what we call N at itself. So the possible transition that we have are what? Sigma to sigma star. So that needs the highest energy. That just makes sense? It needs the highest energy because that's where the difference of the energy is the highest. Okay? So it only happens at vacuum UV. What can you say about a vacuum UV? It's the shortest wavelength. So if you have the shortest wavelength, that is corresponds to a larger or a higher energy. And then you can have an N to sigma. So if you're going to look at the N to sigma, so it can be between 150 to 250 nanometer. Okay, 100 to the molar absorptive is 100 to 300, not so strong. So usually the N to sigma star, that's the saturated compounds with non-bonding electrons. Now if it's N to pi, or pi to pi, okay, you need to have what? An unsaturated functional group. So what does it mean? Double bonds. That doesn't make sense that the pi can only happen in a double bond because the double bond is the only one that has a pi electron. Hindi nyo naisip yun during your undergrad? So the wavelength that you have is what? Between 200 to 700, and they are the one that is most commonly used. Because they are the one that has the range of the UVBs. So yung sigma to sigma star, that's really in vacuum UV. Now the N to sigma star, UV region, but the N pi star to pi star, that's the one that is in the UV. And if you're going to look at the molar absorptivity, 10 to the 100 for the N to pi star, but the pi to pi star is 1,000 to 10,000. And if you're going to look at the common chromophore, so this is, we could say, the lambda max that you observe, okay, in the given solvent. So this is the molar absorptivity, and this is the type of transition. Is this new to you? Hindi ko alam saan inano to eh. I'm not sure. I don't have 140, unfortunately, during my undergrad. But I'm sure that's where this is being discussed. If you're taking 140 or have taken, all of you, I mean, most of the UPLB graduates 140. And what can you say of the lambda max that you have there? So the one, if we're going to look at the electronic transition, the one that is farther or has a higher energy differences, so usually that's the one that has the shorter wavelength. Now, other examples that we have here is some of the chromophores that you have and the transition that it has, the lambda max, and the molar absorptivity. So this is mostly the what? Organic compound. So if you're going to look at this, what we call organic compound, the one that is colorful are the so-called saturated one. And most application of the absorption spectroscopy to organic molecules, they are based to N or pi to pi transition, which requires unsaturated functional group. Classic example, the beta carotene. So question. This is just like a refresher in your analytical chemistry or instrumental methods and organic analysis. Organic analysis ba yung 120 class? Those who are in UPLB grad? Unfortunately, I was not able to take it or hindi kami required sa AgChem eh. Now, if you have a multi-chromophore, so this is the one that contains more than one functional group. So what you have here, we could say is an additive effect. That's why we have a beta carotene, okay? It has several unsaturated stuff. That's why it's already absorbed at the visible region. So question so far. Now, what we have discussed so far is just the P, S, and pi, sigma, and N electrons. Now, there are also other types of what we call electrons that results to the UVB absorbance. We have the D and F electrons, and then the charge transfer electrons. Okay? And in most of this, we could say the absorbing electrons in the organic molecules, they're the one that contributes to the absorbance. Those that directly participate in bond formation between atoms and are associated with more than one atom. And the non-bonding or unshared outer electrons are largely localized about atoms like the oxygen, sulfur, nitrogen, and halogen. You don't usually see carbon with an unpaired or lone pair electron, right? So usually it's an oxygen like this, a nitrogen like this, and so on. Okay? So the next thing that we're going to look is the D and F orbital. Okay? So what can we say about this, what we call D and F orbital? I think this is more on what? Teka, hindi yata 120 yung organic analysis is 140. 120 is the inorganic chemistry. Okay? So when we have the D and F transition, this involves what? Anyone? Masyadong quiet tayo ngayon ah. Usually the D and F electrons are involving this. If you're talking about D, it's the metal. If you're talking about F, this is involving the so-called lanthanide. So absorption involving transitions between filled and unfilled d orbitals with energy that depends on the ligand bonded to the atom. Okay, so we can look first at the D, the first and second transition metal series. So there's an electronic transition of the 3D and the 4D orbitals, and this usually results in broad peaks. So what can you say about this D transition? What can you say about copper? What can you say about chromium? Okay? Ano yung masasabi niyo tungkol sa mga ano na to, metal? If we're going to look at the d orbital. So kapag may copper ka, anong itsura ng d orbital niya? Anyone? So usually transition metals like the iron, the copper, the chromium, they have partially filled d orbitals. And if they are partially filled d orbitals, they can lead to electronic transition. And in these transition metal complexes, usually the d orbitals split into different energy levels due to the surrounding ligand. Okay? And these electronic transitions involving the d orbitals occur when the transition metal complexes absorb light energy. Hindi ba yun yung kagandahan ng 120? Or ano yung lab nun? 120.1? So what's the type of experiment that you have in inorganic compounds? You prepare different complexes, and sometimes you have one metal, but the complexes has different color. Am I right? Anyone? Tahimik lahat ngayon. And just like 140, I don't have 120.1 also. That's why I'm asking most of you based on your what we call experience. Now, if you're going to look at this, the energy difference of this what? D orbitals, okay? Depend on the position of the element in the periodic table, its oxidation state, and the nature of the ligand bonded to it. I think classic example, if I'm not mistaken, yung manganese, iba-iba yung kulay niya at different oxidation state. And if you're going to look the transition, so you can also look at it in terms of the shape that they have, right? Like octahedral complexes. What you do, you surround ligands around the molecule in a symmetrical arrangement, and there can be electronic transitions that can happen between different sets of d orbitals due to the ligand field splitting. And this transition would result in the absorption of light in the visible region, giving transition metal complexes their characteristic color. So if you have what? Fe, octahydrate, okay? Usually it's green. But if you have the copper octahydrate, it is what? Blue. And this is due to the D to D electronic transition. Now for DF, usually it involves what? The actinides and the lanthanides series. So this is the electron transition of the 4F and 5F electrons. They're generally sharp, well-defined bonds not affected by the associated ligand. Okay? So just like the d orbitals, the F transition has something to do with partially filled F orbitals, which leads to this F electronic transition. And this transition would occur when lanthanide or actinide ions absorb light energy, typically in the UV-Gs region. Now, unlike the D transition, the F transitions are not so common. Okay? And you only observe it in the lanthanide and actinide samples. The thing with this one is we could say the lanthanide and the actinide ions, they exhibit characteristic luminescence properties, fluorescence and phosphorescence due to the F to F electronic transitions. A very good example here is what? This and this. Europium. They are known for the red luminescence. Okay? And then uranium, they are also known for this, what we call the luminescence that they have. Uranium exhibits green luminescence. So uranium 3 plus, europium 2 plus. So this is green. And all of them has something to do with the F to F transition. Now, what can you say about the crystal field theory? Anyone? Because I told you I have limited inorganic chemistry experience. How does this play in this what we call transition? So what is this crystal theory? It's a model that used to what? Because the way that we're going to use it is you're going to relate through the crystal field theory, the D and F electronic transition. Anyone? CFT, as they call it. I'm trying to look at my notes. What is this CFT? So usually it's just a model to explain what? The properties of the transition metal complexes. Like the properties you observe them, the color, magnetic behavior, okay? So usually what it do is it tries to what we call show the transition in metals, okay, when it forms complexes, when they are surrounded by these atoms or molecules that we call the ligand. So usually in the crystal field, this is the one that is created when you put ligands around this, what we call metal ions. And what happened in the crystal field? Because if you're going to look at this, in the absence of the external field, the d orbitals are identical. Now, the energies of these, if they're identical, that means they have the same energy. But as you can see, the energies of the d orbitals in solutions, they are not identical. Okay? So that means there's something that's happening in this, what we call the metal ligand complex. And what they have observed is some sort of what? A splitting of the orbital. So absorption involves this electron transition between the d orbitals, and in complex, all the orbitals increase in energies where orbitals along bonding axis are destabilized, right? So meron tayong splitting ng d orbital. So I think this is more familiar to you. The magnitude of the differences depends on the charge of the metal ions, the position in the periodic table, and the ligand strength. And there is an increase in the change with increasing field gap, so the wavelength decreases. So this is what we call the ligand field strength, the iodide, the bromide, the fluoride, and the other, the cyano. So this is the splitting that you have. So this is what you observe if you have an octahedral. This is what you observe, the split when you have tetrahedral, and this is what you observe when there is what? A square planar. And again, this is the transition that happens based on the crystal field theory. Okay, so if we're going to look at this crystal field, it's explained how the geometry and the ligands influence the magnitude of the crystal field splitting and consequently the colors of your transition metal complex. So if they split, what happens? You're going to have a characteristic color from the transition here, okay, of the electrons in the d orbital. So it's mostly applicable to the d orbitals compared to the f orbitals. Now, What's the next one? We have this so-called charge transfer complex. So what is this? So if you have the so-called charge transfer complex, so usually this is important because of their high or large molar absorptivity. So this is in the 1000. So this is just the absorption of radiation that involves transfer of the electron from the donor to orbital associated with the acceptor. So we could say this is an excited state, a product of pseudo-redox process. So for instance, you have the thiocyanate from the colorless. When you mix it with Fe2+, it becomes a deep red color, or the term that we use is bloody red color. So that is an example of this, what we call charge transfer complex. The charge transfer complex. So when you have a charge transfer complex, this is when electrons are transferred between two molecules or part of a molecule. Okay. And the way the transfer can occur, you have what? A donor molecule, the one that gives away the electron, to an acceptor molecule, or vice versa. And they usually form, okay, these complexes are formed when there's a difference in the electron density between the donor and the acceptor component. So you could see the electronic transition here just involves the movement of electrons from one orbital to another. And when this charge transfer happens, it will absorb light energy as it undergoes electronic transition, leading to the absorption of specific wavelengths. So that's why this is involved here. You're familiar with this one, right? The chemical equilibrium experiment. So usually what happens in a charge transfer complexes, you have inorganic complexes of electron donor, which is organic, and a metal. So here, this is inorganic, this is organic, going to an inorganic. Now, another one that they have is this phenanthroline, and then Fe2+, when you form a complex of that, you form this what we call reddish orange. So when you have a charge transfer complex, it consists of an electron donor group that is bonded to an electron acceptor. And when this product absorbs radiation, an electron from the donor is transferred to such an orbital that is largely associated with the acceptor. So in between the case here, the metal is usually the what we call electron acceptor. So I think that's what we call the thing that you have, and I think I still have to give you some examples. So if you're going to look at the absorption of the D and the F orbital, so this is an example that you have for the D orbital, the transition metal. So you have this one, titanium, vanadium, Fe2+, cobalt, okay, and then nickel, you have the copper, and then you have the manganese 2+. So this is just a sample. Usually, what can you say about this one, the one that has a peak at the visible region? Ano yung masasabi natin sa kanila? They are colored samples. Now, for the lanthanides that you have, okay, these are, we could say, some of the spectra So HO3 plus, ER3 plus, PR3 plus, and NN3 plus. They have narrow, well-defined characteristic absorption peaks. Now, if you have ions or complexes from the first and the second transition series, they tend to absorb in all oxidation states and tend to be broad bands that are dependent on the chemical environment. And this leads us to the effect of solvent, or we could say in the qualitative analysis. What are the applications that we have for the UV-Vis in qualitative analysis? So usually we could say it's limited since few resolved peaks, so it's an ambiguous identification not usually possible. And in most of these, the solvent can affect the position and the shape of the curve. So when there's polar solvent, it broadens out the peaks and it eliminates the so-called fine structure. Okay. What's the best way for you to do it for qualitative analysis? So usually you need to compare it with the sample that you're looking for. So if you're going to look at the problem, so look at this one. This is gas phase. This is what we call heptane solvent. So as you could see, there's a loss of fine structure if you have an acetaldehyde when you transfer it to solvent from the gas phase. And if you're going to look at here, at the effect, okay, what can you say? Ano yung masasabi nyo dito sa effect ng solvent? Gas versus what we call a solvent. Anyone? So where do you think this is applicable? The gas phase. Anong nature ng sample? Can I use the gas phase for a particular nature of sample or samples that are what? Volatile. Have you tried getting the absorbance of a gas phase sample? Do you have any experiment that you can get the gas phase of a sample? Let's say you have a cuvette. What do? You put there, let's say, a drop of benzene and then get the spectra. What do you think the spectra would look like? Compare, let's say, the spectra of the whole benzene solution. I mean, the liquid solvent. Do you think there's a difference? Have you imagined that? Try to think. Pareho ba yung spectrum? Kapag, let's say, you put a drop of benzene doon sa cuvette and then allow it to be in the gas phase compared to a liquid, or we could say benzene in the liquid form. Do you see the same absorbance spectra? Ano sa tingin nyo? May difference kaya? The answer is yes, there's a difference. Okay, so usually you see sharp peaks in the benzene in gas form compared to in the liquid form. Now, another thing that you have to do is what? Polarity. So, ano ibig sabihin nito? The one in the alcohol solvent, okay, is, we could say, narrower compared to the one in the more polar solvent. And usually, in experiment, you can determine the difference, okay, of, let's say, a certain substance in different environments. So the polar molecule or the polar solvent, they tend to have wider spectrum compared to this, what we call non-polar solvent. And usually, it's a very good study if you want to determine the effect of the environment or the polarity of a sample in different solvents. So if you're going to compare this 1245 tetrasin, so in the vapor form, this is what you observe. So yan din yung ma-observe na kapag benzene in the vapor form. And when you put it in a hexane solution, this is what you observe. And if you put it in the HCl solution, it's a broad one. If you try to do a calculation, usually the one that will give you is a gas phase. But if you use, like, put this in the solvent, it will give you also theoretical data about it. Try. Okay. And if you're going to look at the other one, so this is the what we call the 1245 tetrasin that you have. And this is the one that I'm telling you. If you have it in the benzene, this is how it looks like. If you have it in hexane, this is how it looks like. So this is one, we could say, of the simple experiment that you can show to your students and see the difference that you have there. Now, if you're going to look at this one, okay. So in the benzene, so usually what you have there is a pi to pi star transition. And you might have something, what, in 184 nanometer. And then you can have another one at 200 nanometer. So that's the E bond or E2 bond. And then another one at 256 nanometer. That is what we call the P bond. So these are usually the UV spectra that is characteristic for aromatic hydrocarbons. Okay. And we could say this characteristic bond, they are strongly affected by ring substitution. So if you're going to put some functional group on the benzene ring, it will have what we call a corresponding effect. And it depends if you put what. I'm not sure if you still recall the electron withdrawing and the electron donating group. So meron effect yan. Okay, because the experience that I have is we use phenylalanine, and what do? We replace it with different functional groups and see what's the effect of it. The polar solvents usually eliminate the fine detail. Non-polar solvent keeps spectral details more similar to the gas phase measurement. So question so far. May tanong kayo, class. You have questions so far. May tanong? May tanong? Parang tahimik ng ano ngayon, ng klase. Mainit pa ba dyan? Now, you can also ask yourself, what are the solvents that you what we call want to use? Usually here, one of the experiments that we had, we look at the different cuvette material, and then we compare the benzene vapor and the benzene solution, and then we compare the different solvents. So the blank is empty cuvette, and then we put the solvent. And from that, you will see what we call the limit it can have. But usually, how do we simplify with the solvent? So usually you set the solvent as your blank, and then use the sample that contains the solvent. That's what we call simplify everything. But if you're just going to look at this, what we call the solvent for the UV region, so usually we could say this is what the lower limit that you have. So water is the one that can be used in the UV region. You cannot use acetone, especially if it's in the UV region. So what makes this acetone not applicable? So if you're going to look at the structure of the acetone, iba ganun yan. So meron kang ano doon. Ano yan? Pi to pi star. The same thing with dioxane, I think, diethyl ether. Okay. So the presence of the compound that you have there is what we call shows transition that results to a particular absorbance. But if you want to still use it, so the practical way is to use it as blank. Kasi ang mangyari, pag sinet siya ng blank, so parang isisiro niya yung ano niyan. So any difference will come from the sample that you have. Okay? Now, we can also obtain some functional group for certain types of compounds. So usually yung weak band at 280, 290 nanometer that is shifted to shorter wavelength with an increase in the polarity implies the presence of a carbonyl group. So if you have acetone in hexane, it's 279, in water, 264. You know what's one of the simplest studies that you can do? Okay. You have, let's say, a particular compound, and what you do is put it in different solvents. And what will happen? So usually you will see like this. So for instance here, what can you say? The one that is in the more polar, it's shifted to the red region. The one that is, the one that is more non-polar goes to the red region. The one that is more polar goes to the blue region. You have the red shift and the blue shift. Okay. And then you can also look at this, what we call the effect of the ring. So part of the experiment that I mentioned you is I asked the student to get the absorbance of this structure, compare it with this. And this. So this is what? Benzene, naphthalene, and anthracene. And usually what do they observe? So, pag ganon, tapos, not really like, it's like this, and then, like that. So there is what we call stabilization or destabilization of ground or changing the energy gap. That's one of them. Okay. but more complex range shift to higher wavelength or the so-called redshift, similar to the conjugated. Okay. So it's a very good, we could say, study. I remember I studied the tetracycline group. What I do, it's not a different solvent, but a different pH. And usually at different pH, there could be what? Protonation, deprotonation, and it's an example of a charge transfer thing. Okay. So you will see a different absorbance at different pH. Now, the thing that you have, I'm not sure if you know this, so this is what? Bathochromic. So that is the red shift. Hypsochromic, that is the blue shift. Now, it is hyperchromic, that means going up. Hypochromic, that means going down. So these are the ones that they do for qualitative studies. Now, for quantitative studies, well, I have shown you at the beginning the applicability of this, what we call the method, but everything depends on the Beer's law. So as long as you have a calibration curve, okay, you compare the absorbance that you have, you can determine the concentration. It can be a single point comparison or calibration curve. But I prefer the calibration curve compared to the single point comparison. Okay. So the strategies that you have, if it can absorb, or the species that you have can absorb, then most likely you can use it for quantitative analysis. Okay. If you want to develop a compound, I mean a method based on a compound or interaction of a compound with your target analyte, all you need to do is measure the molar absorptivity. Now, it's also possible that you can have what? A reaction with a non-absorbing species. So you react it with a reagent that forms a colored product. So ito yung mga patent, we could say, methods that are patent by instrument manufacturer. Okay. So the way that they do, they react it with a colored reagent and they will produce a product. So example that they have here is maybe yung Fe, so STN, or this one, apotransferine, you react it with Fe3+. It's a non-absorbing, pareho silang colorless when they form. You have this what we call red color that you have. Okay, and then you can optimize the condition until you able to determine the lowest detection limit that you can have. Now, the thing that you need to remember here, the absorbance, the pH, the temperature, and the ionic strength. So as much as possible, you do here a standard curve. You match the standards in the sample as much as possible. Now, usually, as I told you, the way that they do this thing is either what? A standard addition method. Okay. You can use it with a series of samples of different concentration of your standard, or a simple one, or a single sample that you added with no concentration of your target analyte. So each of them has what? Their own advantage and disadvantages. But in my experience, I prefer the one that has more standard calibration when you do the standard addition. Now, when do you usually do just a single sample or a single point comparison? Kailan mo kailangan gawin yun? Anyone? This is applicable if the material is, we could say, cheap But if the compound or the reagents that are using are, we could say, expensive, then you have to use only a single point comparison. So meron kang yung unknown sample mo with known concentration ng analyte na inaayos mo, inaano mo, compare mo, okay? And you're going to compare the difference between the two to get this, what we could think. So the way that you do it is, if it's more than one standard solution, okay, so you put different concentration of your target analyte, tapos yung sa isa, yan din yung unknown mo, and then you add all the reagents that you need. And the way that you do it is you'll be able to do a calibration curve and determine the concentration of the analyte. Now, another way for you to do this is maybe using this, what we call the equation, but I'm not going to do a calibration on that. I mean, a calculation on that, okay? And you also have instances where you can do analysis of mixture. So let's say this is the absorbance that you have for the mixture that contains your two analytes. So this is just a sum of the two analytes that you have. So one would be this one, and one would be the one coming here. Now, the absorbance that you get here is just the sum of sample M and sample N, and the absorbance that you get here is the sum of sample M and sample N. And the way that you do it is you just do this double equation method. And last but not the least is you can also use like a photometric titration. And the way that you do it is you titrate it, but you use UVB as your what we call detector. So it requires an analyte, a titrant, or the titration products that absorb the radiation. So these are, we could say, the different cases that you have. So that's all that I have, what we call for now. So if you have here in this what we call photometric titration, you just plot, okay, your absorbance as a function of what? Your volume, or the volume of your titrant. Okay, so the way that you do here, either your analyte, your titrant, or your titration product must absorb. And it has a high accuracy, okay, because you have multiple measurements that you can do. And you can ordinarily perform it if you have a UVB or a spectrophotometer, okay, that you modify, that you can what we call put it in a stationary light path. So question. Ano yung mga project niya sa 230? Those are taking 230. Meron bang UVBs doon? Anyone?
Hindi po kami mag-UVs.
Ha? Hindi kayo ano?
Hindi po kami nag-UVs. Raman spec po yung.
Raman spec kayo.
Sir,
Ano ginawa nyo?
wala pa po sir, pero balik coffee, green coffee po yung samples namin. Extracts po ng green coffee.
Tapos, iraraman nyo?
Yes po.
Hindi ba fluorescent yun?
Meron po kaming nahanap sir na similar yung ginawa nila. Tapos gagawin lang po namin Philippine-based yung samples.
Kasi pag fluorescent yun, wala. Tapos ang ano, wala kayong makukuha. Natatawa ako sa lab report ng mga estudyante ko eh. Kasi we're doing Raman. So, sabi ko sa kanila, maraming mga over-the-counter drugs doon. So kapag inano nila yung Advil, nasaan yung Advil ng misis ko? So it's a colored coating. Alam niyo yung Advil, di ba? Kulay brown. Now, anything that is colored, most likely is fluorescent. So ang nakukuha nilang signal, talagang walang peak. Tapos karamihan ata, I think most of them kapag may Advil, ang sabi nila, it's Raman inactive. Kaya tawa, mga hindi nakikinig sa lecture eh. So, -5. Kaya sabi ko, fluorescent. Kasi yun nga yung disadvantage ng Raman. If your sample is fluorescent, ma-overwhelm yung Raman spectrum niya kaysa doon sa fluorescent. Kasi ang lakas ng fluorescent, yung Raman spectra, mahina siya. In fact, among the light source, kailangan malakas yung light source ng Raman. Ano yung Raman gagamitin nyo? Yung sa physics? May Raman kayo dyan?
May gamit po kami doon sa PC.
Ano siya? Benchtop? Kasi portable yung dadalhin ko dyan na nire-request ni Ma'am Ami. So that's the what we call one of the instrument that I'm going to bring, Raman and a fluorimeter, spectrophlorimeter. Okay. Ba, may GCMS kayo dyan, ha? Nakita ko yung photo, nag-GCMS kayo sa 230.
Sa biotech po yun, sir.
Functional naman.
Yes po, maganda naman po yung maganda po yung instrument.
Ba't di nagagamit ni Jeff? Kasi kailangan ata ni Jeff ng GCMS para doon sa microorganism niya na pang fish meal.
Specific lang, parang yung mga GCMS po dito, kung ano po yung samples ng lab na yun, para doon lang po ata nila pinapagamit.
I see.
Or hindi po siya, wala po sure kung nag-ask po siya kay Sir Nico. Kay Sir Nico po kasi na lab kami nun analyze. Pero ganun po yung protocol sa ERI na dahil hindi po sila nag-analyze ng ibang sample.
Well, I think that's it for today. Unless may question kayo. I'm not sure when I'm going to post the next stop, but I'll try to do it this time because this is, we could say,